Hi guys, Geoffrey here. In this video, I'm going to show you the 4 most common struggles that I see people going through when they're in the process of saving their marriage, saving their relationship, and these are the 4 struggles that you will face no matter what. Even if your changes are very massive, they're the right changes, they're the perfect changes, you're still going to be facing the same 4 challenges anyway. And I want you to stick around to the very end of this video because for a lot of my clients, it's not until they learn what these 4 struggles are and how to get around those that they finally understand how to rebuild that broken marriage, that broken relationship from the ground up again. And in case you're new to this channel, my name is Geoffrey and I help men in long-term relationships or in marriages with the right skills, mindsets, knowledge, etc. to be able to design a thriving relationship by yourself. So if you want more content on this topic, be sure to subscribe to this channel and also click that bell button as well to be notified when I post new videos every single week. And before I begin this video, I also want to let you know that the free masterclass on the 5 proven steps to rebuilding your relationship from the ground up is still open. So if you want to join that masterclass, or if you want to submit your application for the Relationships Revival program, then be sure to stick around to the very end of this video for the announcement on how you can join both those things. So the first struggle that I see a lot of people facing is what we call the external paradox of change. And the external paradox of change here is when you find yourself in a broken relationship, the number one ingredient in that relationship, that is safety and trust, is really broken. And if you don't know what emotional safety is, I would recommend that you watch my videos on those. Just Google my name, emotional safety, and you'll find a ton of videos around this topic. But again, emotional safety and trust is broken. And when emotional safety and trust is broken, essentially your partner's confirmation bias and assumptions about who you are, what you do, the intentions behind you do is usually very negative. And so when you're changing and you're talking differently, you are speaking differently, you are sounding different, you are thinking differently, you're approaching things in a different way, she's going to see those positive changes and interpret it in a negative way and make negative assumptions about those. Maybe it's an assumption of you're trying to be tricky, you're trying to be manipulative, maybe they're just very weirded out by it. But this is when you showcase your changes, you instantly face very intense doubt, very intense suspicions on your partner's side of things. And how most people respond at this point is to try to justify and explain themselves. Hey, this is the reasons for my changes. Here's what I'm actually trying to do. Basically here that you're trying to use logic to try to convince their partner that their changes are real, genuine, and that they should look at their changes. But the important part that you need to understand here is that the part of her that you are trying to convince is not the logical side. The part of her that you're trying to convince is really the emotional side. So it doesn't really matter how much logical arguments you use to show your partner that your changes are real. She can understand it logically, but emotionally, if it doesn't land, if it doesn't hit her emotionally, it doesn't really work. And so if you try the justification approach, the explanation approach, the logical approach, it's rarely ever going to work. You'll find that your partner will say, I understand, but her behavior won't really follow suit. She's not going to be coming closer to you. She's still going to struggle to believe you. She's still going to look at your behavior and think that's really weird. How you should respond instead is, first, internally, try to understand her on a very deep level. You have to understand here that your partner is in a position where she probably has placed her trust in you many, many times in the past. But every time she does, every time she places her trust in you and believes in you, she gets burned. Either burned because you don't follow through on the changes that you promised, things don't get better, or various reasons of what happens when safety is really broken. And again, if you want to watch a deeper video around safety, you can click the link above my head right now to watch that video. So she's been burned many times again, and now you're trying to promise her and justify and explain to her why your changes are real, when you've done that probably many times in direct and indirect ways in the past. And because she's been burned in the past a lot, how can she trust you now? The doubt, the suspicions that she has is very natural, is very normal. And so we need to understand that and have compassion for that in the beginning first. And once we internally understand that, we have to be able to externally paraphrase her point of view and show her that we actually understand where she's coming from as well. So how this sounds like, for example, could be, hey, I just want you to know, I don't want to tell you what to feel, what to do, and I realize that me changing the way I talk, me changing the way I think right now can seem very fake, can seem very manipulative, because I've been there, I've said that, I've made those promises in the past, and I understand how for you, you probably placed your trust in me so many times, and I've ended up burning you so many times as well. So I understand that when you see me changing the way I talk, the way I think, it can sound very ingenuine and fake. And you're probably wondering to yourself if this is going to be real or not. And you're probably telling yourself to not trust me ever again. No matter what he says, don't trust this guy. Is that kind of how you feel? So here you're showing your partner here that you fully understand where she's coming from, that you're not just oblivious to her experience, to what you did in the past, to what happened in the past. And the reason why this works is that, being able to paraphrase and make someone feel understood like this is really the essence of what persuasion actually is. Now, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine that you have a pain on your side and you went to 2 doctors for their opinions. The first doctor you see has some awards here and there, but when you go to him, he doesn't really care about your pain. He just barely asks questions. He just goes, take this. Now the second doctor, he doesn't have plaques on the wall, awards, but what he does is he asks a lot of questions. He dives deep into what you're facing, and he can describe your pain, your sensations, what's happening with your body beyond how you can explain it yourself. It's as if this guy has faced it before, has experienced that pain before, and he's treated a lot of patients with that pain before. Usually, most people will trust the second doctor, the doctor who can paraphrase and understand and make you feel understood deeper than the other doctor can. And if you look at your decision on what mechanics you choose, you'll often find that you'll try to pick people and you get persuaded by people who understand you best, who you feel like understands you best. And so when you're able to come from this place of compassion and paraphrase it in a very deep way like this, you are creating the foundations for the essence of what persuasion actually is. In this case, we're actually trying to persuade the safety and trust in your partner. And when you deeply paraphrase her like this and show her that you understand, what you're also saying is that you're also implying the changes you're making. You're not telling her about your changes, but it's evident by the way you talk, by the way you address the conversation, by the fact that you understand the need to change. And you're not just telling her your changes here, you're showing her your changes by changing the way you talk and speak. So the second struggle that a lot of people have is also missing the mastery of the deep and the subtle as well. Most people who are trying to save the relationship, they're trying to only pay attention to the obvious stuff, the obvious, the tangible things. And the obvious and the tangible things usually entail the frameworks and whatever tactics you learn to appear like you've changed. Maybe you learned a few scripts here and there, learn a few things to do that are different. But again, just like we discussed in so many of my videos, this will never work because your partner doesn't really care about what you do that is obvious, what you do when things are easy, what you do when things are planned, when you can plan a conversation, what you do right once in a while. She understands that those things that you do can easily be faked. What's really hard to fake is what you do when things are hard, when you're tired, for example, when things are unplanned, how you handle curveballs, being consistent, not just right some of the time, but being right all the time. The subtle micro expressions, micro tones you have, that's the stuff that is really, really difficult to fake. Right now, again, she feels this very strong confirmation bias about you where she feels like she can't dip her toes in the water anymore because she's done so many times and she got burned so many times. And she needs to witness, without a doubt, that your changes are real, they're genuine, they're permanent, they're not just some temporary thing you're doing to try to get her back. And to do that, she needs to see not what you do when things are easy, when things are obvious and so on, but what you do in the subtle, what you do when things are hard, what you do when things are unplanned, and how consistent you are with your changes. And you can't be consistent. You can't change your micro expressions, microtones. You can't do well in the unplanned if you're only focusing on the obvious stuff, the frameworks, the things to do, things to say, etc. This is why, in our program, we have a very high success rate around saving relationships when usually it's only one person trying to save the relationship. And it's because we don't just teach people the frameworks. We go much deeper into shifting your mental paradigms or the way you see your world, the way you perceive your world. We shift your identity so that you're not chained to your old self, but you're completely embracing this new self that you're becoming as well. And we also do some scientific work to grow the self-esteem. And in fact, these paradigm shifts, the identity shifting, and the self-esteem building is actually a lot more important. I would say this is 90% of the game. The frameworks are the easy part. When you can understand the internal shifts, the what to do, what to say becomes a lot more natural and will come a lot more naturally to you as well. And this works a lot better because when you can master the internal shifts, you can really master the subtle things. When you say something, when you say your scripts, when you say your words, you're not just saying words, but even the micro ways that your face moves, the tones that you have, they're going to sound a lot more genuine. They're going to come from the right place. And so you're going to master the subtle. You're going to master it when things are difficult, when you're tired. You change your default, basically, of what you do when you're tired. It doesn't really matter because you're not using scripts. You just respond in a natural way because that's who you are. And you can be more consistent as well. And this is the key for long-term implementation that is very crucial to allowing your partner to finally believe that your changes are actually a lifestyle. They're a permanent thing and not just a temporary thing, that your changes are real. And this brings me to my third point, the third struggle, which is the internal, now, paradox of change. So when you find yourself in a position where you think you have changed a lot, changed in a massive way, in the right ways, and your partner kind of craps on it, and doesn't believe it, suspicious of it, doubts it, etc. And doubts it for sometimes 2 to 3 months. That external doubt, that external suspicion is going to turn to an internal doubt, an internal suspicion very, very quickly. And this internal doubt and suspicion usually manifests itself in 2 ways. One is, of course, a passive way, which is when you witness this external resistance, external doubt, nobody believing in you and her not believing in you, and you become dejected. You become hopeless. You go, oh, what's even the point? The active form is when you see this external doubt that becomes internal doubt, and it shows up as you trying to justify yourself, trying to control your partner into believing your changes and getting upset when she doesn't believe your changes. Now, of course, in the passive way, it's obvious why it doesn't really work, because if you give up, then it really shows your partner here that your changes weren't real in the first place. You know, if you've been promising to her, for example, for 2-3 months, oh, my changes are real, my changes are real, and she keeps resisting you. And eventually you say, you know what, screw this, I don't want to change anymore. It shows your partner that you weren't in this for the long haul, that you weren't trying to make this a lifestyle, because you don't actually enjoy the process itself, the process of changing, the act of changing. And so if you play out the passive manifestation here, you're just going to be confirming your partner's suspicions. Now, of course, as we talked about prior, the active form as well, where you're trying to justify yourself, doesn't really work as well. So neither the passive or the active really works. Now, what I tell most of my clients, and why they're able to get through this resistance in a very poised way, is the first thing they do is they look at their identity shifting and their self-esteem. And so you have to ask yourself here, is the way you define yourself subconsciously, very subconsciously, is it still tied to your old self, where you still enjoy being your old self? You still want to be your old self, and you still think that your old self, your old ways of doing things is easy, and that who you want to become is, yes, you want to get there, but you think that it's difficult to get there. If you think it's difficult to get there, if you still think that it's not you, your new self, then you're always going to feel this tug towards your old self. And whenever you get this resistance, this old self is going to win the tug of war. Now, the other part to this is when we bring in things like self-esteem. Are you sourcing the strength, the sense of self-efficacy and self-worth on external people? So are you letting your partner define your worth, or are you defining your worth by yourself? If you can define your worth by yourself internally, then it doesn't really matter what your partner thinks, how much doubt, how much suspicions she's having about your changes. You're still going to be steadfast and rock solid in your belief in your changes, your worthiness, and the efficacy of your changes as well. And so if you're finding this external doubt becomes internal doubt very quickly, and you're finding this struggle number 3 to be the case for you, then either you're missing some major parts about growing your self-esteem, or major parts about identity shifting. Now, you could also be missing some of the right principles behind the frameworks, behind the mindsets, etc., to allow you to feel that sense of self-efficacy that is a part of self-esteem. And the best analogy I can give you on this one is really what we call the iceberg analogy. So I want you to imagine here that you're in a room with a massive iceberg in the middle of the room. And your job in this challenge is to melt the ice, the big block of ice. The only tool you have is a hairdryer that you can plug into the wall socket and slowly heat up the room. Now, the room right now is negative 10 Celsius, so 10 degrees below freezing. Now, when you plug in that hairdryer and you start heating up the room becomes negative 10, negative 9, negative 8, and so on. So it's warming up. Now, when you look at the piece of ice, the ice is not melting. You don't see manifestations of this hairdryer thing that you're doing working at all. But because you understand the principles behind how ice melts, behind how heat works, you know that eventually, if you keep the hairdryer on, the ice is going to melt, even though you're not seeing the ice melting right now. And this analogy is very similar to what people experience in my program a lot, where for a very long time, they're not seeing any manifestations of their relationship getting better. In fact, sometimes it's getting worse even. But because they understand the principles, they keep going anyway. They don't feel this need to waver and give up and doubt themselves because they understand the principles in a very deep way. And so if you feel this strong internal doubt and you are channeling this internal doubt to looking at your identity shifting, to looking at your self-esteem, to looking at the missing principles that you lack, then even though your partner is doubting you in a very big way, so even though you're facing this very strong external resistance, you're not going to be bothered by it, and you're going to let your sense of poise and sense of certainty persuade others to the gravity, to the realness of your changes. Now, the interesting thing that happens to a lot of my clients too is that because they're strong in that becoming self, in their self-esteem, identity shift, and also the principles, they can be more steadfast for a much longer time. And usually what happens is that in the short term, yes, their partner's going to be suspicious and doubting their changes, but eventually their partners eventually catch up to who they are. So basically they define themselves first, who they want to become first. They become that, and then other people catch up. While most people in the scenario, they would be the ones letting other people define who they are. And this is the same thing that happened with a lot of my clients and also with my life as well, where, when I first was trying to change the way I talk, the way I think, the way I operate in a relationship, my partner always said to me, for example, hey, why do you sound like a therapist? Why do you talk like that? That's not how you talk. That's not how you sound. But eventually, 3-6 months later, when I become very steadfast and very consistent with my changes, this is the new version of me that she knows now. And the same thing happened for my business too, where when I first announced to people that I was going to be quitting my job as a data scientist into working with relationships, people were really suspicious of that. People were doubting that. People were saying like, that's not who you are. I don't know why you're doing this. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you crazy? But now this is my identity. This is how people know me as now. Now, the fourth struggle that you are going to get naturally is the revelation and discovery of tough truth. And tough truth here could be a lot of things. It could be you finding out that your partner has an affair. Maybe she never loved you. Maybe she did all these toxic things. Maybe she says some mean things to you. I'm not sure what these tough truths are, but they can come in a lot of forms. Now, the way that most people respond to tough truths here is by what we call active defensiveness, when you're trying to basically look at someone's behavior, negative behavior, and you're trying to tell them, hey, you can't do that. You're trying to control them. You're trying to basically dominate over their negative behavior, telling them that it's not appropriate and so on. Or it could be a passive form of this, where you just simply walk away in a form of stonewalling, in a form of a cold shoulder, silent treatment, whatever it is. You basically say your behavior is not acceptable. Now, if you understand the crux of safety again and again, if you want to watch a video around safety, I've included the link down below this video for you to watch that. So I would watch that to really understand. Most of the time, I would say 99.999% of the time, whenever people do any toxic things, it's usually because of an environmental issue rather than an issue with character. And we talked about this in the previous video when we talked about the fundamental attribution error, and I'll link to it above my head here. So if, let's say, we think here that the reason why a lot of toxic behavior happens in relationships is an environment issue due to the lack of safety and trust, then when we act in an active defensiveness or passive defensiveness, what we're actually doing is we're destroying safety even more. And instead of thinking that we're disabling the behavior, we're actually enabling the behavior and making the behavior even worse. So reacting in this very defensive way doesn't really work. What you want to do instead is, again, you want to see this as a positive thing, that you finding out a tough truth doesn't change the fact that that thing has been happening in the first place. And while ignorance is bliss, it really leaves you in a very powerless state where you can't really do something about the things that are happening. And it's probably been happening to a lot of you, where you've been kind of covering your ears and avoiding the very fact that your partner may be very unhappy and wanting a divorce, etc. And eventually the bomb drops on you. And so here, you can ignore reality for a time, but you eventually cannot escape ignoring the consequences of ignoring reality. But when you discover the tough truth, yes, it feels bad in the short term. But if you really think about it, it really empowers you, because now you're in a position to actually do something about it, to respond to it, etc., to fix it. And so instead of avoiding the tough truth and being defensive, I want you to lean into the tough truth like what we discussed previously. And you should also here avoid what we call the fundamental attribution error. And again, if you want to watch that video, the link is in the description box below this video as well. And this is really the fact that, you look at your partner's behavior, toxic behavior, usually like affairs, stonewalling, gaslighting, giving the cold shoulder, whatever it is. And the first instinct you have is going to be blaming it to an issue of character, to an issue of personality from her side. But like what I talked about in the previous video is that toxic behavior is very rarely an issue of character. It's usually an issue of environment and culture. And once you change the culture environment, you'll be very surprised at how much your partner's behavior can and do change as well. And this is happening to a lot of our clients all the time. And why this works better here is that this is changing the patterns of your relationship. So a lot of people, again, think that being defensive and standing up for themselves is really the best way to disable a behavior. So if you see your partner doing a toxic behavior, you want to get defensive because you want to not enable that behavior. But the question I have for you is, you've been trying this approach for a very long time. The defensive approach, the one where you stand up for yourself. Has that actually disabled her behavior? I don't think so. In fact, the only thing that changes now is that she's still going to do those things or want to do those things, but she just won't tell you about it, which puts you in a very powerless position. So don't let this illusion fool you, because the best way to disable a behavior usually is by creating safety, leaning into it, creating trust. And once you change the culture, you can start to change behaviors as well. And once you create the safety and trust by leaning into it in a proper way, then you are creating a platform for healing. You're creating a platform for rebuilding of trust, rebuilding of safety, etc. as well. So the bottom line here is that if you want real results, if you want to fix your broken marriage, broken relationship, then you will need to master the deeper layers of changes, not just understanding the frameworks of what to do, what to say, but going much deeper than that. And that's not only just the frameworks again, but your paradigm shifts. You need to focus on untethering, removing your subconscious biases into how you see your world, how you interpret your world, etc., how you shift your identity, how you build your self-esteem, and how you create a life where you can be at peak performance in general. And so in our program, we really discuss these stuff in depth, but the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people are not actually willing to do this work, to go through this work, to go through this dedication and energy to mastering the more subtle layers that actually matter. But if you are willing to do this, if you can do this, then the world is really your oyster, because you're going to become such a irreplaceable version that your subtle micro expressions, what you do during the hard stuff, what you do when things are unplanned, and your consistency is going to speak for itself eventually. And it doesn't really matter how hopeless you think your situation is. When you can master the changes in such a deep way, the sky's the limit. If you don't believe me here, if you don't believe just how important the internal shifts are, and when you master the internal shifts, how much change it can bring externally to your relationship as well, I want you to watch my client stories. I'm going to link it for you above my head or here also down below this video, and watch it and see all these guys starting out in very hopeless and dire situations and eventually saving the relationship despite that. So if you want to learn more about these, for not only the obvious things you can do, but also the internal shifts, the more subtle shifts that you need to really fix your broken marriage, I want you to join me in my masterclass on the 5 proven steps to rebuilding your relationship from the ground up. In that masterclass, I'll show you the exact steps that all my clients have used to really get massive results for themselves. And if you want to submit your application for the Relationships Revival program, you can also do so at the end of this masterclass as well. So I'm going to give the link for you here above my head to the masterclass or down below this video as well. And if you're looking for a guide where it will show you what the frameworks look like when not only do you have the frameworks correct, but how the frameworks will look like when you understand the internal shifts needed to do it right as well, then you can click the link above my head for the guide, and you can also download it with the link down below this video as well. And finally, if you want to join a community where you can ask your questions and have a member of my team answer them for you, then you can join me in my free Facebook group down below this video. And finally, if you found this video helpful and you found it eye-opening, then like it. It really helps the channel out, and also subscribe to this channel for more content like this one. But if you have any questions, if you have any comments, feel free to leave a comment below as well. I would love to hear from you. But for now, I will leave you with just 2 other videos with more skills and knowledge for you to design a thriving relationship for yourself. For now, I'll see you in the next video.